Chapter 2, The War That Started It All, starts on page 7. Great Britain's colonies, as we know, were along the Atlantic coast. France sent explorers and colonists to Canada, and from there they moved south, claiming land along the Mississippi River. At first, this didn't create a problem. After all, the Mississippi River and the Atlantic Ocean are far from each other. But as the British colonists worked their way further from the coast, it was obvious that a clear boundary would have to be drawn someday. Meanwhile, the British and the French were constantly trying to find favor with the Native American tribes who lived between them. They did this by encouraging the American Indians to fight the other side, which created rivalry and hatred. In the early 1750s, France built a series of forts in the Ohio River Valley to better assert its claim to land there. The most important of these forts was where the Allegheny and the Mongolian River meet to form the Ohio River. It was called Fort Duquesne. Turn the page. The colonial governments of Virginia and Pennsylvania were worried about Fort Duquesne. They were concerned that if the French established a trading post at Fort Duquesne, it would restrict the growth of their colonies. They were also afraid the French would encourage the American Indians to attack the Virginia and Pennsylvania colonies. The government of Virginia sent a group of 40 British colonial militiamen to Fort Duquesne in May 1754. These men were led by a 21-year-old major in the Virginia militia named George Washington. Washington's men won a small battle, but then had to surrender a couple of months later at a place called Fort Necessity. As small as this event seemed at the time, it started the French and Indian War. The war between the French and the British lasted nearly a decade. It was mainly fought in present-day Western Pennsylvania, New York, and Canada. Although not every Native American tribe fought for the French and against the American colonists in this war, many of them did, which is why it is now referred to by that name. Prior to this time, the 13 American colonies had never really acted as one. However, when the French and Indian War began, there were attempts by some to unify the colonies. In May of 1754, 7 of the 13 colonies sent delegates to a meeting in Albany, New York. These delegates came up with a plan for the colonies to organize themselves, raise taxes, and create an army that would protect them in the war. However, the plan would have not declared independence from Great Britain or taken away any of King George III's authority. The main proponent of this plan was a delegate and newspaper editor from Pennsylvania named Benjamin Franklin. Franklin's newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, printed a drawing in favor of this plan, known as the Albany Plan of Union. The drawing showed, on page 7, had a snake cut into 8 parts, with each part labeled with the initials of one of the American colonies. New England was represented as one segment of the snake, and Georgia, a colony that had just been formed, was omitted. This drawing was one of the first times a newspaper had called for unity among the colonies. The British government put a stop to the Albany Plan of Union. However, it wouldn't be the last time the colonists talked about joining together. Now, back to the war. The French and Indian War was only part of a worldwide conflict known as the Seven Years' War. The Seven Years' War not only involved Britain and France, but also Prussia, Portugal, Russia, Spain, and other countries. Both sides won battles in the French and Indian War, but under the leadership of a new prime minister named William Pitt, the British side won. One of the reasons the British won is that it had 2 million colonists in North America, while the French only had about 60,000. A key moment in the war was when the British Army captured the Canadian city of Quebec. As a result of the war, France gave up its claim to both the Mississippi River Valley and Canada. In other words, France lost its North American colonies to Great Britain.